talk is the science of subjectivity, key to understanding the nature of reality. Our scientists can easily become involved in timid projects which always succeed but never advance. The best part of science derives from the imagination and creativity, which contribute to it no less than to the arts. Certainly we'll have no new knowledge at all unless we continue to foster ideas which shake present beliefs. Dewey told us that every great advance of science has issued from a new audacity of imagination. These quotes are from Dr. Ian Stevenson, a revered co-founder of SSE, who himself had the audacity to study phenomena such as reincarnation. The first quote speaks to what might be called ordinary science, which typically fosters an objective-only approach to the scientific quest for knowledge. The second and third quotes represent those Einstein-type genius aha moments that are the hallmark and basis of breakthrough science, the kind that shakes present beliefs and can result in new knowledge. This type of science, since it depends on imagination and creativity, is rooted in insight and intuition, the basis of which is, well, a kind of high-level subjectivity, about which relatively little is known in Western science. Such genius aha moments are seen as rare, unpredictable, and uncontrollable occurrences of some brain function that's simply not yet understood. What's a scientist to do to help to clear the way for more great advances in science? Objectivity and subjectivity are inseparable from the perception of reality, as is obvious in their definitions. Objective being something that's in the realm of sensible experience, independent of individual thought, perceptible to all observers. And subjective, a characteristic belonging to reality as perceived rather than as independent of mind. How much of visual perception is about what's outside your head and how much is about what's inside your head? Contemporary neuroscience researchers, reflecting on about a half-century of an enormous amount of investigation into visual perception, can't understand why so relatively little progress has been made. Some, such as Bruno Olshausen of UC Berkeley, have concluded that the model emphasizing the study of the external visual stimulus solely or primarily is problematic, and that something more than was ever suspected must be coming from inside the person, in the form of not only memory, but of some seemingly learned pre-existing information. But from where inside the subject? Many contemporary neuroscientists believe that there's a need not so much for more data, in this case in the study of pattern analysis, but for better theories that might help advance visual perception research. To this end, Olshausen and his colleagues have hypothesized that the cortex essentially contains a probabilistic causal model of the environment, and that sensory information is interpreted and represented in terms of this model. Ron Rensick's research is in areas such as spatial perception and visual attention, and in a recent interview in New Scientist, Rensick states, "In sensory perception, especially vision, what you're experiencing is largely the product of what's inside your head. It's informed by what comes in through your eyes, but it's not directly reflecting it." Graham Lawton, the author of the New Scientist article, states, "Given the basic features of your visual system, it couldn't be any other way." Between blinking about every 5 seconds and the rapid eye movements or saccades that go on in the waking state to compose images of our external objective reality, we don't actually see anything for about 4 hours a day. Our conscious attention is not focused externally. We don't visually perceive anything for hours in our normal waking state, and we don't even notice that. So where are we during that time? We, as physical brain, are still there, but what of subjective we? What are we, as a conscious being, doing then? Considering eye blink alone, closing the eye produces changes in brainwave state, and some evidence exists that the greater the number of eye blinks, the higher the dopamine level, and the higher the dopamine level, in turn corresponds to higher states of consciousness. Melcher and Colby state that a basic question in cognition is now how visual information obtained in separate glances can produce a stable, continuous percept. Among the explanations are that perception begins anew with each visual fixation after a saccade. While it's not known how the brain takes these millions of fragmentary bits of visual information and produces a seamless movie out of them, a leading theory is that the brain makes a prediction, and then the eye's saccadic movements are being made in order to verify it. Rensick notes, "We create something internally and then we check, check, check. Essentially, we experience the brain's best guess about what's happening now." So we are subject to limitations in perception, even though we pretty much believe that we see everything that there is to be seen out there, and that if we just look out there carefully enough, we'll see our objective world clearly, accurately, reproducibly every time, or so states the definition of objectivity. But contemporary neuroscience seems to be revealing something else. So what is perception, and how does perception work? Lawton states in an overview, sensory perception, especially vision, is a figment of your imagination. It seems then, after all, that the external visual stimulus doesn't simply interact with light and register its image in our brain, even though we do think this is how we're doing it. We create, according to neuroscientists, so much internally simply to construct a picture or representation of the world we participate in on a moment-to-moment basis while awake, essentially manifesting it for ourselves, to ourselves, even though we don't think this is how we're doing it. Given Lawton's summary of the neuroscience research, we're in a state or realm of imagination, creativity, or intuition when it comes to visual perception, but we're certainly not aware of it. So we're in the state where the aha moments originate, are not conscious of it, and yet are using this state to help build a picture of our world for ourselves. Furthermore, it's the same state one's in when having the inspiration or intuition that results in breakthrough scientific discoveries. But in that case, we are aware of it and the specialness and greatness of such a discovery. So being in the aha state isn't what's rare, it's the awareness of it that's rare. In short, we're not aware that we're not here due to eye blinks, saccades, and probably other things in the physical, perceived world, mundane state, because we believe that we're here. And we're also not aware that we are there during those eye blinks and others in the aha state because we believe we aren't there and probably could never be because, after all, it's supposed to be so rare. Sounds like we're sort of wired backwards when it comes to the reality of where we are and perhaps what we are capable of, and therefore what kind of being, the who or what, we really are. To shed some light, no pun intended, on the visual perception dilemma and the possible states involved from a different perspective, let's look briefly at a particularly elegant Eastern science tradition from around the 9th century called Kashmir Shaivism. Kashmir Shaivism is rich in theory about the nature of ultimate reality and is also known as the psychology of absolute consciousness. A brief overview would include its model of manifestation of the universe and a human being. The model is identical for both and is considered to be the gateway to Kashmir Shaivism. In terms of a human being, here at the bottom, the physical world, the brain is manifesting. The next higher is the mental realm and the realm of the limited individual perceiver. Here the mind is located, and from here down to the physical is where most of us live consciously most of the time. Next at the top box, in the top box, is described an even higher or more internal realm discovered by its sages repeatedly and independently over millennia. Here we find at the top of the box the source of manifestation or the immanent aspect of absolute consciousness or ultimate reality. Just above it, or just above what's next, the manifested higher states of consciousness and being, including the state of aha moments. And the place we go, or the state we instantaneously enter with every perception. But most of us, most of the time, are not usually aware of this. It's in this stage, or state of reality, where manifestation begins, in those higher states of consciousness. Every perception, in a sense, manifests our world for us. As we rest contentedly in our most natural state, which is located here in the source of manifestation, that immediately precedes the first level of manifestation, an initial impulse occurs to perceive something in our world, to create that representation of what we want to look at, for example. The first moment is the most important in terms of fostering human development. The first is squarely in the realm of direct perception of one's true nature. For purposes of this talk, generally, I'm calling it the state of aha moments. Perception continues through the rest of whatever the necessary processes are in its cycle until that perception is complete and we are once again at rest at the same place we were at rest before the impulse to perceive occurred, at the level of the absolute in its immanent aspect, which was the top part of that box in the last slide. But that rest period is typically of extremely short duration because we're once again wanting to or needing to have another perception or thought so we can continue on with life in this state of consciousness called waking and the apparent place which is our world. Just above and before that stage where manifestation begins, and yes, perception is considered a manifestation, is the immanent aspect of ultimate reality or supreme subjectivity or the absolute. It contains all that is ever likely to be in potential form, while it is itself at the same time formless and all-pervasive. A text of Kashmir Shaivism describes it like this: there is an unbounded potency or a basic continuum of power which is known as nada or unstruck sound. This potency condenses itself into a dynamic point. The condensation is not a process in time or space, it is the source of all manifestation. Manifestation is not a one-time creation, but instead an ongoing rolling out of the absolute as the universe. The absolute becomes the universe, yet remains transcendent. So everything is consciousness and ultimately subjectivity. Kashmir Shaivism could also be called a science of subjectivity. Yet higher in the scheme of Kashmir Shaivism is the transcendent aspect of the absolute. This supreme subject is both transcendent and immanent at the same time. The description of ultimate reality at the immanent level, just before the process of manifestation begins, sounds somewhat familiar, like the description of the ultimate cosmic singularity that gave rise to the Big Bang. According to general relativity, the initial state of the universe at the beginning of the Big Bang was a singularity. Here, matters of an infinite density, all forces are united and infinite. Time, space, and natural laws do not exist. The implications are rather mind-boggling, giving new meaning to the phrase human potential and a powerful slant on the goal of human evolution. Comparing the definitions of Kashmir Shaivism and Western science, both the universe and human beings are, in their essential nature, cosmic singularities, but conscious ones. Herein is also all knowledge, all power, and we are there a lot of the time. This is the real source of the aha moments. Kashmir Shaivism seems to suggest a profound answer to the scientist's question of what else is in there in your head, contributing to visual perception, none other than a cosmic singularity. The Kashmir Shaivism scholar, Dr. B.N. Pandit, states, an experience at that first moment of perception is just a simple reflection of an object as it is in itself. It is not at all touched by any mental idea or any word image. It's the mind of an experiencer that imposes on it the ideas of name and form in the next moment. This experience is a knowing accompanied by the idea of a definite name and form. And Pandit further notes, the ordinary mental calculations of a person are based on past impressions and constitute, people are not ordinarily aware of the absolute unity of the self existing at the moment of the beginning of a direct perception. For most of us, our conscious awareness is typically in the realm of the mind and on down, and the individual limited perceiver. The objective world, including thoughts as objects, is what we're aware of most of the time. It's said that one of the many ways to eventually realize the aha state within ourselves is through simple perception. Catching hold of the first moment of any perception, staying there and following that impulse that creates the perception back to its source, remaining in a thought-free state while experiencing a simple perception, direct perception. That's one way to develop conscious awareness of the state, said to be our birthright. A renowned sage of another Eastern tradition, Vedanta, said that eventually all of humanity will live in this state, but we can get there now through yoga practices. And he didn't just mean the physical exercises that we have all these studios for in the West. That source is actually a natural place to be. When you write talks or books and you feel yourself reaching up inside somewhere for that next piece or idea that's just out of reach, chances are that's where you're reaching. Then after you get the insight, that direct perception, in an instant, it can take you an hour to hang on to it and write it out before you fall back out of it. Anybody ever have that happen? Usually by some distraction, some random, irrelevant, intrusive thought, or by objects in the environment, like a growling stomach or a hungry pet. Sports practitioners are there when they're in the zone, and there are other examples. So in conclusion, ironically, one way to move objective science forward is to study in a profoundly subjective science and develop an awareness that is in the states of intuition and creativity. A Western scientist and a great Eastern sage once had this conversation. Scientist. The Western scientific notion is that the scientist must never let his feelings be a part of the experiment. Because of this, the scientist never permits himself to seek an experience of his own mind, his own consciousness. Eastern sage. It is necessary for scientists to experience their own reality through meditation and other spiritual practices. Once we experience inner truth directly through meditation, it becomes easy for us to perceive the truth in the outer world and to understand nature's secrets and mysteries. Perhaps then, with such an understanding, we'll experience an increase in the audacity of imagination that will lead to a more vigorous shaking of present beliefs and produce volumes of that new knowledge so highly valued by Dr. Ian Stevenson. Thank you.
We have some time for questions.
Thank you, Maria. That was terrific. As you were speaking, I was reminded of something I've been reading about lately, which is the practice of William James. That in the 19th century, he and a few of his colleagues would regularly anesthetize themselves, go deep into a state of etherized unconsciousness, and then experience as they came out of that unconsciousness exactly what you're describing, that first perception, that brand new, that whole, that oneness. And his enthusiasm about being in that state drives him all the way through all the literature and the psychological and philosophical traditions that, that we understand him to be a contributor to. And what he was doing primarily as a direct experiencer was making himself go to that singularity and then return to the multiplicity of the world.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Wow.
Yeah.
What a demonstration. Thank you. Thank you, Dick.
Maria, thank you.
You're welcome.
There was a line at the bottom of one of your charts that basically said that the conscious mind and subjectivity is embedded in the universe. In other words, the universe arises out of subjectivity, or it is subjective. I'll make a proposal that the conscious mind, through a process that I call coherence, becomes form, space, and time. And this is where I think objectivity, or the appearance objectivity, arises. Below it is the consciousness. Your comments?
I think there are, fortunately, a lot of ways to look at the pieces of this. And for me, Kashmir Shaivism, I've studied a lot of Eastern traditions and a lot of Western science. And it holds one of the most complete explanations. And I'm not sure exactly what your question might, if there's a question about it, but as far as your comments, I think it's important to have many different ways of looking at things. It's certainly not the only way. I mean, even to the point of people who become realized beings, there are many, many, many paths that people can follow to become that. And in fact, one of the Eastern Swamis of the Eastern tradition states that it's more the student's effort almost than it is what it is that the student is studying. And as long as that effort is there and that creativity about it, I think speaks to what Dick was saying too. It will get you places with ideas in the world that one didn't even imagine before.
I guess the question embedded in my comment was, do you see a way that objectivity could arise out of the subjectivity of experience instead of dumping all of the universe in as a subjective experience? how does objectivity arise? I proposed a method that could happen.
Oh, okay. Yes, I don't disagree with that. I think that's absolutely possible, yes.
Thank you once again.